Good afternoon, everyone. What I am going to do today is to give a synthesis or summary of Fratelli Tutti. As a synthesis, the important points are covered, but there are still some details that can be explored. You might want to explore them. Fratelli Tutti is the third encyclical of Pope Francis. The first is Lumen Fidei, which is about our faith in God. The second is Laudato Si, which deals with how we care for creation. And third, Fratelli Tutti, which is on fraternity and social relationships or social friendship. We note that all encyclicals are about the human being's relationships with God, with nature, and with one another. Because of this, maybe we can say that Pope Francis is the Pope who is an expert on relationships, or much better, he is the Pope of inclusion. As far as Fratelli Tutti is concerned, Pope Francis drew inspiration from some sources. Foremost among them was Saint Francis of Assisi, who in one of his counsels to his brothers called for a love that transcends the barriers of geography and distance and declares blessed all those who love their brothers as much as when he is far away from him as he is with him. The Pope also mentioned Blessed Charles de Foucault, who directed his ideal of total surrender to God towards identification with the poor, abandoned in the depths of the African desert. Pope Francis was also encouraged by the Grand Imam Ahmed Al-Tayyib, whom he met with in Abu Dhabi and with whom he declared that God has created human beings equal in rights, duties, and dignity, and has called them to live together as brothers and sisters. The Pope was also encouraged by letters, documents, and considerations he has received from many individuals and groups, like the Catholic bishops of the United States and Mexico, France, India, Australia, the Congo, South Africa, Colombia, Korea, Croatia, Latin America, and the Caribbean, many of whom he even quoted in the encyclical. Among non-Christians who inspired him, Pope Francis specifically mentioned Martin Luther King, Desmond Tutu, and Mahatma Gandhi, great human beings who also struggled for fraternity and social friendship in their lifetime. The main purpose of the Pope for writing this encyclical was, first of all, to put together the thoughts and ideas that sustain him and to extend invitation to dialogue among all peoples of goodwill who together would build a world of fraternity and social friendship. We may ask, why is there a need to build such fraternity and social friendship? Are we not doing it yet? Many priests and nuns and members of the laity might think that all our ministry and apostolate are preaching about love and brotherhood. Our schools, hospitals, and orphanages are testimonies to our efforts towards building fraternity and social friendship. However, despite our efforts towards that goal, the Pope sees the reverse happening in our world at the present times. He sees dark clouds over a closed world. That is the title of the first chapter of the encyclical. Our dreams of building a world of love and friendship are shattered and seem to be directed towards the opposite direction. The more we are globalized, the more we are individualized and closed in on ourselves. The closer we get through technology and social media, the farther our hearts drift away from one another. We become neighbors, but not brothers and sisters. The world lacks a plan for everyone. We are devoid of a shared roadmap. Each individual, each family, each group or country has its own grand plans which excludes everyone else. In number 30 of Fratelli Tutti, the Pope writes, and I quote, "In today's world, the sense of belonging to a single family is fading, and the dream of working together for justice and peace seems an outdated utopia. Isolation and withdrawal into one's own interests are never the way to restore hope and bring about renewal. Rather, it is closeness, it is the culture of encounter." End of quote. In this world devoid of a shared roadmap, many people are excluded as we develop a throwaway world. The unborn, the elderly, the displaced workers, the victims of racist attitudes. We protect an insufficiently universal human rights. In some parts of the world, the rights of women are not respected through their exclusion, mistreatment, and violence towards them. Third World War fought in a piecemeal fashion, terrorist attacks, racial and religious persecution, and many other affronts to human dignity are realities we cannot deny. Many migrants who flee their countries of origin because of persecution, poverty, and suffering sometimes encounter the same woes in their host countries. These isolation, separation, and fragmentation are encouraged by the digital media, which can block the development of interpersonal relationships. They present an appearance of sociability but do not really build community. Digital media, through which people can say anything with unlimited intensity, often through hidden identity, foment social aggression. They can be utilized in the manipulation of conscience and the democratic processes. They can disseminate tons of information without wisdom. They can even spread false information to achieve some sinister agenda. Amidst these dark clouds of a closed world, in spite of the shattered dreams marked by conflicts and fear, Fratelli Tutti offers streaks of light and hope. Pope Francis takes his cue from our experience of the pandemic due to COVID-19 that has affected millions and killed many throughout the world. The Pope observes that this pandemic has shown us that there are people who can put their lives on the line for the safety and protection of others. Doctors, nurses, pharmacists, supermarket vendors, garbage collectors, and many ordinary people have shown us that our lives are interwoven. We cannot be saved alone, but with one another. There is great reason to hope. Pope Francis in Fratelli Tutti grounds this hope on the Word of God focusing on the parable of the Good Samaritan, a beautiful story in which a Samaritan who had a cultural and religious enmity and separation with Jews helped a distressed Judean, showing us that true charity can go beyond the walls of color, culture, and creed. The teaching of Jesus is grounded on the Old Testament and New Testament insights. In the story of Cain and Abel, when God asks Cain, "Where is your brother Abel?" God is telling us that we cannot be indifferent, but that we should resolve our conflicts with one another. Further on in the book of Job, we are taught that on the basis of our origin in the one Creator, we have common rights. Job says, "Did not he who made me in the womb also made him? And did not the same one fashioned us in the womb?" That is from Job 31, verse 15. The book of Sirach, chapter 18, verse 13, enjoins human beings to expand the scope of their love to approximate that of God. It says, "The compassion of man is for his neighbor. The compassion of God is for all living beings." The New Testament has many parallel teachings. In Matthew chapter 7, verse 12, it is said, "In everything, do to others as you would have them do to you, for this is the law and the prophets." St. Paul, in the letter to the Thessalonians, chapter 3, verse 12, 1 Thessalonians, recognizing the temptation of the early Christian communities to form closed and isolated groups, urged his disciples to abound in love for one another and for all. From the context we have shown above, we can better understand the significance of the Good Samaritan. Love does not care if a brother or a sister in need comes from one place or another. For love shatters the chains that keep us isolated and separate. In their place, it builds bridges. Love enables us to create one family where all of us can feel at home. Love exudes compassion and dignity. The encounter of mercy between a Samaritan and a Jew is highly provocative. It leaves no room for ideological manipulation and challenges us to expand our frontiers. It gives a universal dimension to our call to love, one that transcends all prejudices, all historical and cultural barriers, all petty interests. This is what God wants. The question is this what we want? Is this what the men and women of today's world long for? Can we pursue and follow the streaks of light that will lead us to the fulfillment of our hope? Pope Francis in Fratelli Tutti says, yes, we can. We can do what God wants because deep inside us, that is also what we want. In number 87 of Fratelli Tutti, Pope Francis, quoting the existentialist philosopher Gabriel Marcel, writes that human beings are so made that they cannot live, develop, and find fulfillment except in the sincere gift of self to others. nor can they fully know themselves apart from an encounter with other persons. I communicate effectively with myself only insofar as I communicate with others. No one can experience the true beauty of life without relating to others, without having real faces to love. That is why man has to take up the challenge of moving beyond himself and follow the law of ecstasies, where the lover goes outside the self to find a fuller existence in another. Human beings have to fulfill the duty to love, to develop a charity based on the intrinsic value of the other, a love that considers the beloved as somehow related to ourselves. In this way, we build social friendship and universal fraternity based on the worth of every person. Social friendship and universal fraternity thus implies that no one should be subjected to the demeaning and dehumanizing tolls of poverty and deprivation. To claim economic freedom while real conditions bar many people from actual access to it, and while possibilities for employment continue to shrink, is to practice double speak. Words like freedom, democracy, or fraternity proves meaningless. I quote Pope Francis, only when our economic system no longer produces even a single victim, a single person cast aside, will we be able to celebrate the feast of universal fraternity. That is in paragraph 110. Integral human development goes beyond material and economic sufficiency. It has also to promote maturity in the moral values. In the pursuit of the good, each one must strive to do good to others, to fill the life of others with what is beautiful, sublime, and edifying. This includes care for our planet. Pope Francis also discussed private property, and in this topic, he was so much influenced by Thomas Aquinas, a Dominican saint and doctor of the church. The idea of social friendship and universal fraternity that hopes to eliminate the exclusion of many from partaking of the goods of the earth has something to say on private property. Pope Francis in Fratelli Tutti writes, and I quote, the principle of the common use of created goods is the first principle of the whole ethical and social order. It is a natural and inherent right that takes priority over others. This insight has a long tradition that dates back to the earliest fathers of the church. John Chrysostom, for example, has said that not to share our wealth with the poor is to rob them and take away their livelihood. The riches we possess are not our own, but also theirs. Saint Gregory the Great said, and I quote, when we provide the needy with their basic needs, we are giving them what belongs to them, not to us. St. John Paul II, for his part, wrote, God gave the earth to the whole human race for the sustenance of all its members without excluding or favoring anyone. This doctrine on private property has far-reaching implications that may affect our views on the limits of national territories or borders. This can be construed as the most dramatic and powerful insight of the encyclical. Mark these words, and I quote Pope Francis in number 124. He wrote, "Nowadays, a firm belief in the common destination of the earth's goods requires that this principle of private property also be applied to nations, rather the universal ownership or use of the earth's goods can also be applied to nations, their territories, and their resources, seen from the standpoint not only of the legitimacy of private property and the rights of its citizens, but also of the first principle of the common destination of goods. We can then say that each country also belongs to the foreigner. Each country also belongs to the foreigner, inasmuch as the territory's goods must not be denied to a needy person coming from elsewhere. As the bishops of the United States have taught, there are fundamental rights that precede any society because they flow from the dignity granted to each person as created by God." End of quote. Pope Francis then proposed 4 words that should guide host countries in the way they treat migrants. The 4 words are welcome, protect, promote, and integrate. Welcome, protect, promote, and integrate. These could be done by facilitating the granting of visas, allowing the opening of bank accounts, access to employment, protection of minors and providing them education, granting full citizenship, and avoiding labels such as minorities or cultural minorities. This integration of people from other countries and cultures opens up to a mutual gift of self that the incoming culture and the host culture can give to and receive from one another. In the process, both are enriched. This implies that both cultures should be well entrenched and solidly grounded on their self-identity, but at the same time open to enrichment from each other. Such is the inevitable trajectory of globalization. Such openness should also breed mutual assistance among different countries that could enrich all, aside from concretely realizing fraternity and social friendship. Pope Francis says, and I quote, "We need to develop the awareness that nowadays we are either saved together or no one is saved. Poverty, decadence, and suffering in one part of the earth are a silent breeding ground for problems that will end up affecting the entire planet." End of quote. That is in page, or rather, number 137. Fratelli Tutti also discussed politics, and it focused on the politics of charity. Promoting universal fraternity through the practice of social friendship demands a new kind of politics. It is a politics that rejects demagoguery, that chooses the desires and prejudices of common people to achieve and stay in power and exploit the resources of his country afterwards. In this way, popular leadership degenerates into a populist strategy, which in the end impoverishes the people. True and authentic politics should have a healthy concept of people, which is an open-ended category. To be part of a people is to be part of a shared identity arising from social and cultural bonds. And that is not something automatic, but rather a slow, difficult process of advancing towards a common project. It is open to being mobilized, challenged, broadened, and enriched by others, and thus to further growth and development. What needs to be developed, according to Pope Francis, is political charity. A social charity that makes us love the common good, that ensures that everyone partakes of the resources of each country and the rest of the world, that no one is excluded. One of the best ways to achieve this is employment that allows everyone to participate in the preservation and the harnessing of creation for the sustenance and enjoyment of all. Welfare arrangements should only be temporary. The people should be allowed to participate in the work of creation. This kind of charity needs the light of truth that we constantly seek. That light of truth is both the light of reason and the light of faith. In the exercise of political love, Saint Francis was once again influenced by Thomas Aquinas, whom he cited. And I quote Pope Francis, "There is a kind of love that is elicited. Its acts proceed directly from the virtue of charity and are directed to individuals and peoples. There is also a commanded love that expressed in those acts of charity that spur people to create more sound institutions, more just regulations. It follows that it is equally an indispensable act of love to strive to organize and structure society so that one's neighbor will not find himself in poverty. If someone helps an elderly person cross a river, that is a fine act of charity. The politician, on the other hand, builds a bridge, and that too is an act of charity. While one person can help another by providing something to eat, the politician creates a job for that other person and thus practices a lofty form of charity that ennobles his or her political activity. Ultimately, a true and good politician, a noble politician, should ask himself or herself not whether he got the highest number of votes in all of the country's history, not whether the survey ratings are always excellent. The politician should rather ask the following questions. How much love did I put into my work? What did I do for the progress of my people? What mark did I leave in the life of society? How much social peace did I sow? With these questions, the politicians must have considered his work as a lofty vocation. In order to arrive or to promote social friendship and universal fraternity, Pope Francis encourages or promotes dialogue. To dialogue is to approach, speak, listen, look at, come to know, and understand one another, and be able to find a common ground. It is not a feverish exchange of opinion on social networks, frequently based on media information that are not always reliable. These are more aptly called parallel monologues, meant to achieve a person's or a group's political, ideological, and economic interests. Genuine dialogue, on the other hand, listens and admits that the other's point of view may have some legitimate truths and convictions and should be listened to and considered. Through this mutual respect and acceptance of one another's views, a people can engage in a healthy public debate where everyone is enriched. Here, Pope Francis recognizes the role of media in promoting this dialogue. In this regard, he considers the media as a gift from God. In this dialogue, we have to pay attention to the truth that can be manipulated and distorted for selfish interests. We need to learn how to unmask the various ways that the truth is manipulated, distorted, and concealed in public and private discourse. What we call truth is not only the reporting of facts and events, such as we find in the daily papers. It is primarily the search for the solid foundation sustaining our decisions and our laws. This calls for acknowledging that the human mind is capable of transcending immediate concerns and grasping certain truths that are unchanging, as true now as in the past. As it peers into human nature, reason discovers universal values derived from such nature. Among these are the inviolable dignity and worth of every human person created in God's image and likeness, and the moral principles that go with it. It is the discovery of these truths and valid moral principles that, although they may be embodied in different practical rules, in the end would bind us in a universal fraternity and social friendship together. Thus, there should always be room for dialogue through which we build a culture of encounter that enables us to accept the differences that enrich all of us. As we engage in dialogue, what paths are we to take to arrive at peace and renewed encounter? There is a need for healing in many parts of the world, and we need people to lead in this path to peace. There is no other way but to start with the truth about what really happened and the pains and wounds we experienced through the past events. Truth has to be acknowledged because it is an inseparable companion of justice and mercy towards the path to peace. Those who were wounded can choose the path of forgiveness, but it does not mean doing away with legitimate conflict. When a person or situation is brazenly against Christian values, forgiveness does not mean that we should allow the person or situation to persist. Healing and the way to peace is when the person or situation undergoes a process to change so as not to continue inflicting the wound. Justice, of course, must be sought. True forgiveness enables a person to seek justice without resorting to anger and vengeance that could only prolong the spiral of violence. Two paths that are sometimes trod do not really bring us to peace. They are war and the death penalty. For Pope Francis, war is the negation of all rights and a dramatic assault on the environment. If we want true integral human development for all, we must work tirelessly to avoid war between nations and peoples. To this end, there is a need to ensure the uncontested rule of law and tireless recourse to negotiation, mediation, and arbitration as proposed by the Charter of the United Nations, which constitutes truly a fundamental juridical norm. As far as death penalty is concerned, Pope Francis writes, the arguments against the death penalty are numerous and well known. The Church has rightly called attention to several of these, such as the possibility of juridical or judicial error and the use made of such punishment by totalitarian and dictatorial regimes as a means of suppressing political dissidents or persecuting religious and cultural minorities. All victims whom the legislation of those regimes consider delinquents. All Christians and people of goodwill are today called to work not only for the abolition of the death penalty, legal or illegal in all its forms, but also to work for the improvement of prison conditions out of respect for the human dignity of persons deprived of their freedom. The Pope considers extrajudicial killings as an illegal form of death penalty and must also be repudiated as well. The last topic that Pope Francis dealt with in Fratelli Tutti is the role of religions in the building of universal fraternity. Fratelli Tutti asks how religions can help build a universal fraternity. Pope Francis sees the different religions as important means towards building fraternity and defending justice in society. This is on account of their respect for the human person who is called to be a child of God. The most solid foundation, however, of an appeal to fraternity is every religion's openness to the one Father of all. If we have one Father, then we are all brothers and sisters. There is no reason for violence, nor vengeance, nor selfishness in the use of the created goods meant for everyone. It is the acceptance of transcendent truth which man obeys and in which he finds his full identity. That is the sure principle for guaranteeing just relations between people. Pope Francis writes that the root of modern totalitarianism is to be found in the denial of the transcendent dignity of the human person, who, as the visible image of the invisible God, is therefore, by his very nature, the subject of rights that no one may violate. No individual group, class, nation, or state, Not even the majority of the social body may violate these rights by going against the minority. In relation to this, the church, rather Pope Francis, discusses the church's role in political affairs. Because of the transcendent truth in the human person, the church has an important role to play in political affairs that can be affected by political powers. While the church respects the autonomy of political life, she does not limit her mission to the private sphere. The church cannot renounce the political dimension of life itself, which involves a constant attention to the common good and a concern for human development. But in her involvement in the political sphere, she does not aim to compete with political powers, but to offer herself as a family among families, open to bearing witness in today's world, open to faith, hope, and love for the Lord and for those whom He loves with a preferential love. The church is a home with open doors. The church is a home with open doors because she is a mother. The gospel for a Christian is the source from which arises for Christian thought and for the action of the church. The primacy given to relationship, to the encounter with the sacred mystery of the other, to universal communion with the entire human family as a vocation for all. The Christian draws this from the gospel. The Pope then challenges all believers to return to the sources in order to concentrate on what is essential: worship of God and love of neighbor. Lest some of the teachings can be taken out of context and end up feeding forms of contempt, hatred, xenophobia, or negation of others. The Pope is convinced of the truth that violence has no basis in the fundamental religious convictions, but only in their distortion. He then writes, and I quote, as religious leaders, we are called to be true people of dialogue, to cooperate in building peace, not as intermediaries, but as authentic mediators. Intermediaries seek to give everyone a discount, ultimately in order to gain something for themselves. The mediator, on the other hand, is one who retains nothing for himself, but rather spends himself generously until he is consumed, knowing that the only gain is peace. Each one of us is called to be an artisan of peace by uniting and not dividing, by extinguishing hatred and not holding on to it, by opening paths of dialogue and not by constructing new walls. Fratelli Tutti is a very pastoral document that intends to bring the world towards the goal of social friendship and fraternity. It is frank, to the point, and does not hesitate to question age-old doctrines and practices and values that may have been outdated. It is also transparent in its objections to current practices and political policies that may be contrary to the gospel message. If only all people of goodwill would heed the insights of this encyclical, the world would indeed be directed to the path of peace, to social friendship, and universal fraternity. Thank you very much and have a good day.